I have a couple of quick reminders before we dive into questions that I want to go over. I just want to remind everyone of all the different formats that we have to engage. We have our weekly office hours from this time from 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And so we really appreciate you diving into questions, any scenarios that you're working on as well. We also have a monthly APAC office hours, which occurs the second Wednesday for each month, and that's from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then on alternating Wednesdays, we have both Python and Java development office hours. And so those are every other Wednesday for each of the respective areas from 9 to 9:30 Pacific Standard Time. And so for that, we're really diving into in-depth help if you're wanting to be able to help with some of the backlog items we have, any sort of deep technical issues they're having with either Python or Java as well. And then in between all of our different office hours, we do want to let everyone know that there are GitHub discussions that we'd love to be able to discuss with you further. So don't feel like you have to wait a week for any of your questions as well. So a couple of quick announcements for mine before we dive in. Wanted to really highlight our docs update that we have. So we've gone through and restructured the different concept areas, updated the quick start guide and others as well. And so you'll see a couple other updates coming. But as soon as I stop presenting, I'll go and pop the link to the docs in chat. But I wanted to make everyone aware that there are a lot of updates and a lot of goodness to go through there. And so wanted to make everyone aware. And then in the Semantic Kernel blogs, we do have a couple of other partnerships that we've done with other teams in terms of .NET and others, and there'll be some upcoming case studies that'll be shared out shortly as well, and so stay tuned in the blog area. And I know a lot of individuals have been asking around roadmap and backlog, and so we do have our backlog by bucket of different areas that we're working on, and so wanted to make everyone aware of some of those different areas as well. And so I'll pop those links in chat, but I want to go and turn it over to the community for questions you may have. Hey, Anupam, if you want to go and come off of mute.
Hi, Sophia. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for joining the call. Sorry, this would be quick, but general reminder, we are doing a survey currently, and getting responses from this community. We are trying to understand what kind of challenges you are facing while developing LLM apps and what is keeping you from moving from, let's say, a dev or POC stage to productizing or moving your app into production. So I'll share the link again. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes to answer those questions. There are about 8 to 9 questions. So if you can answer those questions, that would be helpful. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Yeah, if you don't mind dropping the chat, I can pull it up as well in the window for the survey. We really appreciate everyone who's taken the time to go ahead and fill that out. But if there are individuals who haven't, we'd really appreciate you going through and giving us that feedback as well.
Yep, I just dropped the link in the chat.
Perfect. And with that, we'll go and dive into other questions as well. Is there anyone who has a question? I see that there's one in chat around agent chat streaming completed, and Matthew had added that it's just been added. There's still work on it to support. Are there any further questions on that, Steve, that you want to come off of mute and dive into?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only other thing I had on that was that's great that the streaming works, but as it relates to chat history for agents or group agent chats, is there any auto trimming or any features around that that you guys are looking at implementing as far as like getting over token limits when you have RAG inserted into agent chats or anything like that? What's the best strategies or are there any utilities baked in already to take advantage of that, or do we have to self trim the chat down with things like summarization or other techniques?
So today it's work that you'd have to do yourself. Sophia did link to our backlog by bucket So I just want to highlight the items that are meant to target that. So I want to share my screen, and we'll see if you believe this will address your problems, or if there's more work that we have to do. So I'm going to pull up our projects, go into Semantic Kernel. Of course, you can click on the link that Sophia provided, but just want to give a kind of quick view. So there's two pieces to it. The first is as you define the agent, you actually have to be able to provide or describe this behavior. The current plan is to achieve this through template support. So as you build an agent, you should be able to basically provide it a prompt template, whether that's written in Liquid, handlebars, Semantic Kernel's kind of out-of-the-box templating support, so that you can have things like system message and all of the other previous chat messages that were part of the history. Now, the challenge that you're expressing is the chat history can become too large and unmanageable, right? And so there needs to be a way as part of these templates to be able to actually manipulate or prune or simplify the chat history. And so we have a body of work in the chat history and prompts section. And if we take a look at that, we have a whole section that we're calling History Reducer Plugin. We want to be able to provide you within a template a bunch of helper functions for you to reduce or simplify a history, whether that's summarizing it, taking top in, finding relevant message from messages. All those should be provided out of the box so that you can just instantly start using it. We did, as of like yesterday or 2 days ago, we did run into a customer that wants to do more AI work to simplify and make the chat history smaller. And running a summarized query every time you are generating that template could get expensive. And so we are also investigating routes where you can save this information and persist it longer term without just using these functions. So I'll take a pause there and see if this is kind of headed in the right direction, or if you have additional feedback that we should take as we help with this history reducing problem.
Yeah, I think all those types of utilities and toolkits are going to really help us. The challenge I have is a lot of times with an API search, if it's calling out to grab a bunch of vector data, right, and it's coming back with that vector search, I don't really know the size it's going to come back with. Kind of just depends on various API function endpoints, and so that data comes back, and then at some point, chats are just going to blow up, unless there's some type of trimming happening. So I think, I was going to do on the agent chat side, I was going to just try on every agent turn to count up total tokens in there and then do a summarization and then chop that down. But I haven't got that far to look into, how to count that up on that side to see if I can get into that total agent chat and count all those strings up. So I assume that's accessible in the current NuGet version, correct?
I believe so, yes. The other recommendation I would have, it sounds like you're hitting token limits and issues as part of the RAG process. So
Correct.
You hit search endpoint, whether it's Google, Bing, or your own vector DB, and you get a bunch of content back. What I've done in the past is, instead of taking all of that raw content and just immediately putting it in the chat history, always have like a summarization step in between. It doesn't address the entire problem that you have. Like, the chat history is still going to get too large and you're going to hit token windows, but it might alleviate some of the immediate pain that you're feeling, and it might be a little bit easier to implement.
Gotcha. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
Perfect. Thanks for the question. Luca, do you want to go ahead and come off of mute?
Yeah, thanks. Maybe it's related to this question in part, but I have a very silly doubt. I've seen that in a sample, a very simple sample where I have just a kernel with a web search plugin, and I've seen that the query parameter that is passed to the web search plugin, it actually rephrase the user question. I mean, it doesn't pass the question as the user put it into the chat, let's say. And actually, I'm fine with this. I think it's also good, but I don't understand how it happens. I mean, it's the LLM itself that decide to rephrase the query, or okay. And my question is, do I need to instruct in some way the LLM to do this, or it behaves in this way automatically? Because, for instance, I want to implement a plugin, a similar plugin, where basically I take a query as input, but I want to take care of the whole history. So I want to rephrase the query, taking into the consideration the whole history.
This is a wonderful question. I love this question. Okay, so let me go ahead and do I have a good example of this? Maybe I don't. Okay, so I'll just speak to it real quick. So the LLM is deciding what to put in that search term, and behind the scenes, it's using function calling. So the AI is getting a description of function. In this case, it's search Bing, and it knows that there's a query parameter. Because the AI is being told, hey, this is a Bing search plugin, and this is a query, it can use its foundational model knowledge to go, oh, for this user query, to get the right answer from Bing, I probably need to rewrite it. And so very little extra has to be told to the AI and to actually transform that information. If you want different behavior, there's two main ways that you would achieve it. Either as part of the system prompt of the agent, you would say something to the effect of, don't change the user's query, like always copy and paste it into the Bing function. If you don't, bad things will happen, right? And that would drastically change the behavior that you're seeing. Likewise, if you want to provide more guidance of like how it structures the query, you could do it that way. The other way, especially if you're building your own custom plugin, which it sounds like you are, you can actually provide descriptions for each of the parameters for the function. And so if you have a search plugin and it has a query, you might put inside as that description, hey, make sure you phrase it in this particular way, or make sure this is a keyword search. So use as few keywords as possible to actually get matches. The AI, when it gets that function manual, is going to use that information so that it can appropriately fill out the information. So just to recap, if you add your function, likely it's just going to work. If you need additional control, use the system prompt or a description on the parameter.
Okay, so I think that I'm going to use the description of the parameter in my case and ask to basically take into consideration the whole history of the conversation. Fine. And by the way, since my plugin is an OpenAPI plugin, I've seen that there are two methods: import OpenAPI and import OpenAI. Is there any difference between these two methods?
Yeah, great question. So actually probably more than a year ago, OpenAI introduced this concept of plugins, which basically include a manifest that wrapped an OpenAPI spec. Our function import OpenAI takes that top level manifest, and then we use that to get the actual OpenAPI file and import it in. Since all of that work, OpenAI has deprecated that manifest file. So I would expect no one. In fact, we should probably obsolete it. I would expect no one to use the import OpenAI function. Everyone should probably be using the import OpenAPI, which you just give the OpenAPI spec. Great question.
Oh, okay, thank you a lot, Matthew.
Perfect. Thanks, Luke. I really appreciate it. Other questions folks may have, feel free to come off of mute. Perfect. I see a hand. Ganesh, apologies if I mispronounced that. I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, that's okay. All right. Hi, Matthew. All right. I'm going to give a bit of a context for our problem, and then maybe just want to know your opinion on how to uh, get it working the right way. So we're using RAG, and we're using an external database, Solar database, and um, the first part of the problem is we want to kind of get a lot of data. We want to add it to, let's say, the chat history, or have a memory store. So that's kind of the question, right? So what's the best way right now that we can achieve it? So right now I can see there are three ways from where I see it. The latest documentation asks us to get the data and add it to the chat history for prefetching RAG queries. Now, since the data is really, really big, is it okay to do that? Yeah, right here. So we is it okay to get all that data and add it to the chat history? Will it still be able to go through all of that data and then retrieve the right pieces of RAG for us? The second way, which I tried out, was to use the kernel memory. Kernel memory by itself, when you give it a huge document, I see it kind of chunks it down by itself. It makes it into partitions and then searches on that and then retrieves the relevant pieces of information. And the third is, using a custom Solar memory store, which also, which again, we're trying to see if that would work. But the real question is, which of these three ways is currently the best way to do it, and which should we, incorporate into our project?
Yeah. So, like all great questions, it depends. um, so like I would say in most cases you would want to actually chunk up your documents and then use something like a vector DB to pull the relevant chunks in. This is particularly helpful if you have content across like multiple documents that you need to retrieve information for. You don't want to retrieve the whole document, you just want to pull the relevant sections. So using kernel memory to achieve that is, I'd highly recommend it. And I forgot who asked the first question. Before all of the scenarios that you're describing, to further reduce the token count that ends up in that main chat history, you might want to perform a summarization activity, which again, I think kernel memory does a summarization on those chunks before they're added back in. There are cases, however, where you'd want to pull the entire document. I have seen cases where pulling chunks is just not an effective strategy for getting the right information. So the best example is like a process flow. You can imagine a entire document that's 10 pages long, and across the entire 10 pages, it describes 10 steps, right? And if a user asks, hey, can you describe the 10 steps for creating an account? If you just use vector similarity search, it's probably going to like pull maybe the description. It might pull some other random chunks, but it's not going to pull all of the information necessary for the AI to go, hey, these are the concrete 10 steps, right? And then those types of questions where users are asking things that a whole document is required, that's where getting that entire document and giving it to the AI would be helpful. Again, though, that's a lot of tokens. And so having an intermediate step that summarizes it, condenses it down to give to that main chat history can be beneficial.
Great. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
For sure.
Perfect. Thanks for the question. Tristan, do you want to go next?
Lag at the minute. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, sorry about that. So just piggybacking on that last question, we've got a few. I've seen this requirement come up a few times where people want to do a detailed comparison of two documents, like kind of diff of the two documents using GPT, and it may be a case of wrong tool for the job. But like, I guess, there are tools that are built for this stuff, right? Like actually, providing you that side-by-side comparison of two files, and you get it in Word and things like that. But I'm just kind of wondering, like, if you are mainly orientated on RAG for bringing that data into your solution, and then somebody gets that requirement, how best to sort of pivot to the point where you're providing the entire document if you're trying to do it in that tool? Because it feels like the kind of thing that users can't be expected to understand isn't going to work very well without taking a different approach, if you see what I mean.
Yes. Just thinking. I want to repeat back the question for you. So, like, the user scenario is like, I have two different documents. Like, what's different? What you're saying is, if they just like blindly go, I'm going to use my AI assistants to do that, the documents might be large and it doesn't necessarily find like all the particular issues. And what you're saying is like, there's off-the-shelf products that already kind of solve this. How can I make sure that users are best served no matter kind of which route they're going? Is that right? Kind of.
There's one.
Oh, did we lose Tristan?
Sure.
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Try
We
one
can
more
hear
time.
you now. Yeah. Perfect.
Sorry. Yeah. Also chunks, but chunks into memory, right? Like, and perhaps that's the wrong approach. I don't really know, and I'm not even 100% sure myself how we've arrived in that position. But I guess the additional context here is that the wrong approach?
Okay, chunking it up. What's the difference between documents? You're just going to get chunks back, and you won't be able to actually compare these two different documents. Is that right?
Yeah, because that's the experience we see right now. Yeah, is that we have a document upload functionality, and we are RAGing from some fixed repositories, right? Where in either the scenarios, somebody might ask this comparison question, like uploading two documents at once. It's just not going to work, I don't think, if we're chunking. But document upload functionality in general, I feel, will benefit from the chunking approach.
So, a couple thoughts. If this is a common enough scenario where people are like comparing two documents, adding a function or a tool that kind of does that particular task could be helpful. Because then within that tool, instead of using the chunks, you just say, oh, I'm just going to get the whole document. To your point, you'll do a diff and you'll return to the AI, like, here's the differences, tell the user about it, right? So that's one thing. The challenge with that approach, though, is if that's not like a top use case, you probably don't want to build a tool for it. That might be overwhelming. And then you're wasting one of the tools on this behavior. Someone did mention in chat kind of additional researches that's happening. They link to GraphRag. We are finding that combining relational database concepts like relationships and kind of these graph approaches with vector DBs is very powerful and probably where the future is kind of going. What we've seen in the past is the AI can do a search and it'll get chunks back. So that way it can know like what document it's actually looking at. But then we know that that chunk is related to this parent document. And if the AI is aware, oh, I need to actually get the whole document to compare these two different things, it can then traverse the graph itself, get the full document or documents, and then compare them. So this is definitely, I would say, in research mode still. But if I kind of look in the future out a little bit, that's kind of where I'd expect things moving and actually how to solve this particular problem.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for the detailed answer.
Yeah. Rigoberto.
Perfect.
Yes, hello. So my question is about the fact, so on the 19th, you had mentioned that in a few weeks from that date, the fact that regardless of whether you were using Semantic Kernel with Azure OpenAI or just OpenAI, that regardless, the part that SK depended on to then call LLM, that up till now has been the same, but it's about to be two different NuGet packages. So first question is, so in a very simple implementation of Semantic Kernel, you build the kernel, and then at that point, you care about whether or not your key is going to be from OpenAI or Semantic or Azure OpenAI, and then you do whatever you're going to do, a prompt, an agent, whatever. Will anything after building the kernel be different based on the decision you make on which one to use? OpenAI versus Azure OpenAI.
I think there's like one additional change. This is team, y'all might have to correct me if I misspeak, but my understanding is the three major changes that you'll have to do is obviously point to the new namespaces when you're using. Oh, actually, let's back up even more. You obviously have to import the new packages, right? Two, in your import or using statements, those will change just slightly so that you can use the right new namespace. You mentioned actually importing this into the kernel. That may or may not change. I don't. The contract might change very slightly so that we can make some improvements that we've always wanted to do but couldn't because of your break and change. The final thing that I'm aware of is when you make a request to the LLM, you can provide execution settings. One of the things that we have done over the last few months is we've abstracted function calling to be a concept that works across any of the model service providers. But the way you do it with OpenAI is still very hard-coded specific to that. So there might be a one-line code change there to use the generic version of function calling. But I've been told by the team that the changes should be minimal. I believe that's it. Someone should come off mute if I'm wrong anywhere. But we want to make this as painless as humanly possible.
So theoretically, if you installed the packages that are depended on by both, and you had all the using statements that you would need, regardless of which one you used, if aside from building the kernel and maybe the execution settings, the actual, like when you actually make the call, the prompt, that would be the same,
Yes.
except perhaps with function calling.
Yes, and that will be a one-line change in execution settings. Everything else will be the same. It's all using the iChat completion interface. We like to pride ourselves in being able to say, hey, you changed one line of code and you're using a completely different model. So because of that, all of your downstream logic, if you are using dependency injection to inject in an iChat completion service, anything downstream of that should be completely identical.
So can we expect documentation like highlighting these differences like side by side, just some very explicit?
So I guess quick timelines of what's happening. So we have two engineers working in a feature branch. I don't know if someone from the team can get that feature branch and paste it in the chat. They're making all those changes. I don't believe they've started, but one of the things that they'll obviously have to do is update all the samples. I or Sophia will then look at all those samples and identify what are all the different changes, and we will document it. We'll put it in our docs, and we'll also have a blog on it. But again, our current understanding is no functional or logic changes will be necessary as you make that switch. It'll be one-line code changes of like using new names. So we will make sure those changes are documented and make an extremely easy migration guide.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Also, just one note on that. If you are using Microsoft.semantic kernel when you're importing this assembly, and you're not specifying like specific packages like connectors.openai, you just import Microsoft.semantic kernel. Basically, this is meta package, which means that currently connectors.openai assembly is imported for you automatically, which means that if you're using that, as soon as we separate those SDKs, probably you don't need to install additional packages, because most probably we will include a separate Azure OpenAI package in this meta package as well, so it will be downloaded for you automatically. So in terms of actual changes, most probably, as Matthew said, this is going to be like some namespace changes and probably some small changes in execution settings, and that should be it. No need to install additional dependencies or something like that, unless you are currently importing your semantic kernel packages separately, like semantic kernel.abstractions, semantic kernel.core, connectors.openai, etc.
Perfect. Thanks, Dimitri. I really appreciate that. Perfect. I'm seeing a good question in chat from Jeffrey. Jeffrey, do you want to come off mute? If not, I'm happy to read out the scenario that you have.
Sure. Yeah. So the idea is we have an app that kind of implemented before all this agent goodness. And I'd like to rework it to work with agents. We have a dialog data store where we're just storing the chat history, the user message, and then the assistant message. And looking at the agent abstractions, I see that there's like this chat history channel, and then there's like a handful of other abstractions. So I'm just trying to understand like what the right way to leverage these new abstractions and bring my dialog data store to the agent. What the right way to do that is.
Yes. How do I want to tackle this? Let's start with channels and why they even exist. So when we designed our new agent framework, the main goal was if you have agents from different systems like Azure OpenAI Assistance API or your own chat completion agent, they should be able to talk to each other. The most immediate problem that we had, though, is their concept of what a chat history is wildly different. And so we needed like a translation layer or a broker in order to do massaging for us. That is why we introduced this channel concept. And we'll probably rename it to maybe like broker or something. As a developer who's just using the agent framework, our expectation is you should never have to know what a channel is or ever have to use it, because it's just a translation layer between the two main types of agents that we have. Now, for your scenario, you could replicate kind of the behavior of the Assistance API, where as part of its channel, it's like hydrating and managing your thread or your chat history in another database. That is an option. That is something that you could do and is supported. We do have, however, additional work, which I think, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I think might be a better fit for your needs. So I'm going to paste it in the chat. As part of the agent framework, we have this group chat that sits at the very top. All these agents participate. And it contains the list of participants and the global chat history. If your global chat history is the thing that you actually want to save to your database, we are in the process of working on enabling you to serialize and then deserialize the group chat object. Once that work is done, I would expect most customers to use that serialization and deserialization path to actually save the state of the chat history to something like Cosmos DB.
Yeah, that sounds great. So that is work that's in flight for being able to serialize the whole chat history?
That is correct. So what I linked to you is our architectural design doc. So if you, let me actually just share my screen. Okay, so if we click on this link, it'll open up this guy. You can check out the files changed, and we have a document that's actively being worked on. I guess my ask for you in particular is give this a look. We have some pictures to show like what are we actually going to serialize and what the serialized state is expected to look like. If you have any concerns about kind of the approach, leave comments, but I believe this should address the needs that you described. Cool. This is the
Great.
top ask for our agent framework. So I'm excited to get this in.
And as you're going through it, feel free to reach out and GitHub discussions in between office hours if there are further questions. I know there's been a lot on agents, so really appreciate the question. Seeing in chat, Jay, you have a good question. Do you want to come off of mute? I'm happy to read it out if not. So Jay had detailed using for Python the PyInstaller manual or Py2 X. And so what's the recommended approach for the integration of Python and C#? Is Iron Python still a thing?
I think I used Iron Python once, and it wasn't updated to the latest version of Python. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't my favorite experience. I think it depends on what you mean by integration and what you're hoping to achieve. Are you able to come off mute?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
We
Yeah.
can. Perfect.
Yeah, it was just that Luis had a question about some library was in Python. He was wondering if there's a .NET instance of that application. So I just recommended, there's other ways to do this. And then I was thinking, yeah, if you have a recommendation of how to integrate the two, how to integrate .NET and Python.
Got it. My normal canned answer is make a microservice that you can call. That's probably too heavy for LM Lingua. Most of these like research projects for AI though, they talk a big game, but they're pretty simple. So let's look at because normally it's just like a prompt and that look y'all, LM Lingua is one Python file. It's a pretty long one. Oh my God, why did they put this all in one file? Okay, so I lied. This is complex. So you probably won't be able to just port this to .NET like I thought you might be. So yeah, maybe like a microservice thing. Is anyone else from the Semantic Kernel team have any better recommendations than me? I don't think I have a good one.
Yeah, I think microservice would be an approach. I'm not sure, like, you can also test it with Iron Python just to see if it's going to work, but Iron Python is not running like all of the Python code really good, especially if it's related to some, LLMs, neural processing and other things. So you can test it with Iron Python and give it a go. But then, if not, that probably microservice should be the way how to do this.
My God, that's complicated. Okay. Anyway, not going to go down that rabbit hole.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Perfect. Thanks for the question, Jay. I'm seeing in chat a good question around multi-agent from Steve. Steve, are you able to come off of mute to give us a bit more in-depth knowledge of the scenario you're working through? If not, I'm happy to read out in chat as well.
Yeah, I just looked through the item there for the research that you guys are doing on the different agent chat patterns, and the total time for response with you have 2, 3, 4, 5 agents can get pretty long, especially when they're all doing different tool calls. So I'm just kind of being conscious of how can we make that as efficient as possible. And I have a scenario where I have 5 agents in a group chat. Two need to go do research. A third answers, third format, another one formats, and then the last one does a review and replies back. If I can get the researchers to run in parallel, that'll obviously reduce that. And that's just one use case I have today. I know that's going to be a pretty common use case in agent patterns in the future. So have you guys decided based on what AutoGen research has done, and are some of those going to be able to be ported over to Semantic Kernel?
Yes. I'm trying to find the actual item. Where did I have it? Okay, I'm having trouble finding it. What we found from
I have it up.
Oh, you have the issue, great. Well, yeah, what we found with let's see. Oh, okay, okay, he's investigating that. The scenario that you're describing is what we've been calling like a workflow or a process, where you probably like more concretely define like, hey, these are the steps that need to happen. That is also on our backlog somewhere that I can't seem to find right now. What we have found is there's a few different approaches to it. There's LangGraph. AutoGen has something. Crew AI also has something. We will likely not copy and paste or replicate what's in AutoGen today. They are working on a new version of AutoGen that addresses some of the challenges that they faced before, this being one of them. Once that is complete, we'll probably reference that, or we'll allow Semantic Kernel to plug into this new framework or infrastructure that they're building. So I'm going to be super cagey about what that looks like, because it's being built across Microsoft and is actually probably going to be turned into its own product. So I kind of will leave it there, but large portions of Microsoft are now working on this problem. So I would expect by Ignite, we'll have a solution for you, if not sooner.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks for the question, Steve. Let's see, anything else in chat? Anyone else want to come off mute? Feel free to put any questions you have in chat, or if there are any scenarios that you're working through that you're willing to share out, we'd love to learn more about what you're building.
I thought this was going to be light office hours. In the States, we have tomorrow off. I've never had a Thursday off. It's so weird.
It really is.
So thanks all of y'all for joining today. All right, should we go ahead and wrap things up?
Yeah, let's do it. Thanks everyone for joining in. Really appreciate your time. If you have questions in between our next office hours, feel free to put them in GitHub discussions and we'll go through and triage them. Really appreciate the Semantic Kernel team for joining as well, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers, y'all.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.